Hello and welcome back to your 13th episode of Husky Dash with your hosts at Nathan Mathisen and myself at 9 3/4. Today we're going to be diving into the future of the Huskies 2020 football season, the biggest surprises that we came up or that we found from week one of Pac-12 football, as well as game cancellations and what they'll mean for the league as a whole. As a reminder, please feel free to drop a comment or even just a hello, and we'll make sure we cover our segments and anything that you guys say in chat. Before we get started, though, we have DAWG snacks. Clemson just lost their first game in what's at least 4 seasons. I'm pretty sure it's 5. It's been a very, very long time. They lost their first game, and it goes to Notre Dame. So congrats to the Fighting Irish. You just undercut a big giant. Okay, on to segment 1. Are the Huskies' playoff chances already out of the window? Like, what's up for the rest of the season for the Huskies? Do we have any future? Do we have any hope? Personally, I think it's really hard to say. Nathan, what do you think?
I think it's tough to say, but really the main thing that I'm looking at that this Cal game being canceled and not playing, it's going to affect the strength of schedule for UW, which in the past has been something that the College Football Playoff Committee has looked at and used strongly to kind of justify not putting the Pac-12 into the College Football Playoffs. I believe the Pac-12's only had a team twice in it, as Pac-12 strength of schedule is usually much weaker compared to an SEC team who plays some of the top 10 ranked schools on more common basis than a Pac-12 team. And the strength of schedule without Cal on the Huskies schedule is great because the Pac-12 North, it was kind of thought of as Oregon at number 1, clearly above the other schools. And then you've got UW and Cal kind of at 2 and 3, kind of equal. And then you've got Stanford and Oregon State and Washington State in a kind of a third tier. And now with UW not facing Cal, I mean, that takes a big hit on their strength of schedule, especially looking at the crossover matchup that UW has. It's against University of Arizona, which is another one of the bottom tier Pac-12 schools. Cal kind of lucked out with their strength of schedule with them. Their crossover matchup is against ASU, who we'll talk about a bit later on, which is a much better school than University of Arizona. So the strength of schedule is really just for UW Oregon. That's the one game that should be a great tough fight for UW. They're probably going to be underdogs. And the other games, quite frankly, UW should handle kind of easily with Oregon State, Washington State, University of Arizona. Stanford, it could be close-ish, kind of, but Stanford's one of those schools that doesn't get much national recognizability. I mean, week 1 against Oregon, I believe the score was 35-14 they lost. So Oregon, again, being that 1A school with UW kind of two like behind them and Cal right next to them. So that strength of schedule is really going to hurt, I feel, UW's playoff chances. I mean, I look at it like even if UW somehow goes undefeated, so they're 6-0, but then there's this SEC team that's 8-2 or whatever. They have 2 losses. I would think the college football playoff picks the 2-loss SEC school over just because of the competition that school faced. Like you look at an Alabama school facing Georgia, facing all these other top-ranked SEC schools.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really, really hard. If you look at even not counting strength of schedule, I mean, as you said, you're just talking about the amount of games a team gets to play. The top 4 teams on the Associated Press's poll at the moment, which is Clemson, Bama, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, they already have a combined total of 21 games played amongst the 4 of them. And looking at us as like a hopeful playoff contender, we haven't played a single game yet, you know? And like these, like I was Googling it earlier in the day, like week 1 Pac-12 or this, and I was using the week kind of format, and I said week 1 Pac-12, and my first Google search result was week 8 of college football. So like we're already behind that much in terms of games being played. So like losing out on a game, especially for the position we're in, where our next best game is at the end of the season and everything between is kind of filler. You definitely lose out on that strength of schedule thing. I think the one saving grace for University of Washington and for other teams that might have missing games from the schedule that they can't make up. Like we probably won't be able to make up this the UC Berkeley game. We probably won't be able to make that up. However, I know that there's other coaches in the league alongside Jimmy Lake who are really big proponents, especially this year with it being COVID, that they're really big proponents of the AP poll or these other polls and whoever's doing the rankings, that they really need to look at the quality of games. I mean, I think Coach Lake said it best. He said, I see a lot of teams ranked right now that gave up 60, 62 plus points on defense in one game. And I don't know if you're a voter, how you still rank them in the top 25 when their defense is giving up points like a basketball game. So you've got to be able to watch the games. That's from Coach Lake himself. And I have to agree. If you're supposedly a top 25 team and you've once, twice, maybe three times, still, yeah, you've won all your games. Maybe you're 6-1, 7-1. But out of a couple of those games, you've thrown up more than 60 points as a defense. Like, you've just given that away. Oh my god, like that's not quality. That's not championship level football. You can't have a gung ho offense and just a crap defense, because like you're not going to get anything done, and no one's going to take you as a serious team if you don't have the work and effort and ability to put out successful defenses. So I think that's the one saving grace, is that there's some teams in the SEC, Big 12, Big 10 on the eastern part of Washington who have given up those big point games. And I think that if UW doesn't give up any, I mean, we have to go undefeated. That's undeniable. But if we end up coming up on a loss against Oregon or one of these other teams, it cannot be a blowout, and all of our wins have to be decisive. Like, that's the only track I see where we get a mid to easy shoe into the playoffs. Like, even then, I don't think it's guaranteed.
Yeah, I don't think it's guaranteed. I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's plausible that UW makes the playoffs, especially without the full 7-game schedule, which even that's less than these 10, 12-game schedules these other conferences are going in. And yeah, a loss to any team would just be catastrophic, even if it's just by 1 point, because one loss puts them at 5-1, best possible record. But yeah, there's a 0% chance they'd get into the playoffs, I believe, with 5-1. I mean, you look at some of the other teams. You talked about these teams with great offenses and kind of the quality of play. Yeah, if UW can, I mean, blow out every game they play, like winning 30-3, 27-7 blowouts like those, yeah, it'll be impressive. But then again, we bring it back to the strength of schedule. I mean, it's these teams that are in these high-scoring games. Sometimes the other team's just as good. They're like a top 10 matchup some of these SEC schools are having with one another. That's where I look at it, with like the quality of play and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be problems around the league for quality and quantity, especially in the Pac-12. Like, SEC schools, these other schools may not be having those problems, but like as you said with that last point, as you brought up, like strength of schedule. I mean, it's downhill. Sorry, not downhill. It's an uphill battle from here. It's not going to be easy for any Pac-12 school to do it. I mean, for us as the Huskies, for Oregon and USC, any of these teams that want to compete for that chance to go to the playoffs, they're going to have to go undefeated. They're going to have to win the championship game, and they cannot be giving up a lot of points in their wins. And it's not us they have to convince. It's not the fans they have to convince. It's the guys doing the voting for those playoff games and those playoff slots. Those are the guys they have to convince. And I think out of the three groups I just mentioned, out of fans, us, and the voters, the guys who decide it, I think they're going to be the harshest critics. And so convincing them is going to be the hardest part, and that's what has to happen if we want any chance of making it past having just a 6-game schedule.
Yeah, I think, and moving it to kind of a more short-term impact that this game cancellation has, and you could see, I actually think that there could be kind of a effect on this next week, this game against Oregon State, possibly due to UW having not played last week. UW have not played for 329 days since they last played, and that's a long layoff. They're going to have to get out there and shake the cobwebs off quickly, because Oregon State just played last week. So they kind of had their tune-up game. I mean, they lost to Wazoo 38-28. And, I mean, no matter how heavily favored UW is against OSU, if UW comes out flat because they haven't played in so long, then, I mean, you're playing another college football team. You could easily lose. They could easily make some big plays. So UW's going to have to knock those cobwebs off quickly and come out ready to play. I think they will come out ready to play. From what Jimmy Lake said in some press conferences, they had a team meeting right away when the game against Cal got announced that it was canceled, and he said that his players were just locked in and focused. So if they come out locked and focused, then maybe the cobwebs don't matter. But I'm just pointing out it could be a slow start for UW.
Yeah, I mean, you're just gonna have to. We're both gonna just have to hope it's not. I'm thinking, I'm hoping, I'm wishing here that the week off or like the extra week heading into it, we've been able to just ramp up even more and just have that energy super high. I mean, that's just gonna. We're just gonna have to wait till Saturday to see that. I hope that happens. Speaking of LSU though, in games that happened this past weekend, one thing that I found super surprising was a game I think that didn't garner that much attention, which was the UCLA Colorado game. The I guess the face of the surprise is that Colorado did really well. They came into the conference. Since joining the conference, they've had 8 losing seasons and 4 different head coaches in 9 years. So congrats to them. That alone can be a surprise or like an uptick for them. Speaking of UCLA, though, as their opponent, I think the most surprising thing that happened around the league, counting USC's near defeat, was that UCLA just came out of the gates like they forgot how to play football. For the entire first half of that game, for every single one of their possessions, this was the order in like what their possessions resulted in. It started with a fumble. Second possession was an interception. Third possession was a punt. Fourth possession was a TD. Fifth possession was another fumble. Sixth possession was another fumble, and then they had to punt it away again on the 7th. How do you start a football game like that where I can't even say you're driving down the field because you've not only fumbled the ball 3 times in a single half, which is more than most teams do in an entire game. You've also thrown an interception and barely generated the amount of effort required to get one into the end zone to get 7 points. They had a little more than that heading into the half and whatnot. But like having those as your starting possessions is horrible. Like I just don't see what you can do with that.
I mean, those were those cobwebs. It took them a while to knock them out of their brains and heads. I mean, yeah, they were down 35-7 at one point. Ended up being, I think, 35-14 at half.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, talking about the second half, though, that was almost more surprising with them nearly coming back.
Yeah, I ranted a little bit about this too in my notes. It was just like they went so far as to say, "Hey, here's this lead." At one point, you guys were up, what is it, 28 points, 4 full touchdowns on us. Okay, let's just get our butts in gear. Let's claw our way back to being within 7 points of them. Although I will say, shout out to Colorado's quarterback, who last year was a safety, Sam Neuer. Congrats to him for being a safety and pulling this kind of stunt. He was a safety a year ago and then decided to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to put this game in the bag. I'm going to go ahead and get a rushing touchdown to just put it away, go up 10 points and just say, to go up 14 points again and just say, you know what? It's fine. Like, we're not going to worry about it. UCLA's offense was not outputting what they needed to be able to win that game. And clearly their defense wasn't doing enough either. I think that was the biggest surprise. I personally had projected UCLA as winning this game. I had projected them doing very well coming out of the gates, and just none of that happened.
Yeah, it was UCLA came out extremely slow, but you got to give them credit. They did fight back. They clawed back, got within 7. Then they went down 10 or 14 again, got within 7. They just dug themselves too deep of a hole. And talking about UW, OSU kind of, hopefully UW knocks those cobwebs off much quicker than UCLA did, because a 35-7 hole in the second quarter that's quite a feat. They actually, though, I believe, got back to 28-35 or something, like 10 minutes to go in the third quarter. So they started off like fire, start the third quarter. And yeah, talking about the Buffalo quarterback, he played great. A safety last year, really transitioned well. Just, you got anything else to say on this game?
Oh yeah, I don't want to say this is like a UCLA's quarterback, I forget his name. I'm really sorry about that, but he did extremely well as well. He had, I think it was 20 for 40 on his passing, so that's not great, the 20 for 40, but it was like 303 yards, 4 TDs, one interception. This was all by memory, by the way. Like, this isn't my notes, so if those numbers are wrong, I'm sorry. But UCLA's quarterback had a field day. Like, he did absolutely phenomenal. Defense just has to step up, have to start driving the ball down the field sooner than the third quarter. That was my biggest takeaway. My biggest surprise of the week was how that game went. I thought it was insane. What was yours?
Yeah, mine was the ASU USC game. I mean, coming into it, you're looking at USC. I believe they're 20th ranked in the AP polls or something around there, and then ASU unranked. But ASU kind of, I mean, there was some chatter about them kind of having some potential, having a good season maybe. But really, everyone thought USC would just go in there, handle the ASU team, and march out of there with an easy win, kind of like Oregon did against Stanford. But that didn't happen. ASU, I mean, they started off strong. USC started off slow. Another one of those cobwebs, talking about cobwebs. ASU, I mean, they were up 2 touchdowns nearly, I think 13 points with 2 minutes to go in the game, just about, and they blew it. I mean, so that's really big. ASU basically had the game in the bag. They were chatting on the sidelines, probably wondering what they were going to do after the game. And then USC shows everyone why they were the number 20 ranked school in the AP polls and just simply scored. I mean, they turned up their offense, they turned up their defense, and dominated ASU in the last 3 minutes or so of the game. And looking at it like how good ASU is, how good does this game show them as being? I think this game kind of showed ASU as being a pretty good team. They're a team that I wouldn't be shocked if they run the table the rest of the year in the Pac-12. I mean, Utah might be a tough game, but the other games I would be favoring ASU. And they kind of showed that they just have to get over that hump. They started off strong. The middle of the game was strong. Third quarter of the game was strong. But fourth quarter, when the lights were on, when they needed to show up, they didn't show up. So that's something ASU is going to have to work on. And then looking at how good USC is. So you're 20th ranked and you nearly lose to ASU. But the important part is they didn't lose. They started off extremely slow, similar to UCLA starting off slow. Not quite that slow, though. It never got that bad. And they came back. So I think USC kind of just kept where they are. I think they stayed the same AP ranking, kind of at about 20, and they'll have another week to prove that they're better than that. But overall, I think both those teams showed that they're for real, and they could challenge for the Pac-12 championship, and maybe even USC could get into the college football playoffs. So that was kind of my big surprise, just how well ASU fought, and then, of course, the shock of them falling apart in the end.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere they described the game as USC got outplayed for 57 minutes of that game, but when it came down to it, those last 3 minutes, which were the most important, USC rose to the top and took control. Speaking of this, though, again, like I was saying, quality of games earlier, this is going to be one of those games that where if USC like buckles up, the rest of their season now, they're not just competing for wins. They have to also show that these close wins are an anomaly, that it's not happening again. Hopefully we like the Huskies don't have to end up in the same situation as USC is right now, because if they take another couple of games to close wins, that's not going to be convincing enough to set it up for the playoffs. And I think that's the same boat UCLA is in. If they want any chance of Colorado, if Colorado wants any chance of making it past just their first 7 games, every team's in the same boat. I absolutely agree with you. USC that game should have never been that close, unless it was like the absolute first score of the game, because then it's 3-0, it's 3-0. But yeah, both of those games absolutely huge surprises. I hope the second week it starts to go back to normal, but again, we're in 2020, so who knows anything? Who knows what's normal anymore? I don't. Speaking of things that aren't normal or maybe are the new normal, game cancellations due to COVID. They've been happening up and down the coast, all the way across the nation, left, right, and center. They're absolutely terrible because when one team cancels, it ruins the hopes and dreams of 2 teams for that week, as well as future plans. Obviously, Husky fans everywhere know about this because Berkeley had to cancel their game. The other cancellation, I think, was the Utah game. Utah had to cancel it, right, against Arizona. Yeah, so Utah had to cancel their game against Arizona, which sucks. Some funny notes about that. I think right after Berkeley, whoever canceled second out of Utah and Berkeley, whichever one of them canceled. So right after Utah canceled, someone flashed a thing that was like, "Hey, go get Arizona and UW to play a game. Like, go get Arizona." And apparently, it was like they talked about it for like 20 minutes in a conference somewhere, and then they were just like, "Yeah, there's not enough time. We don't have planes. We have no idea where to go to get to the field. Like, we don't know what we're doing." And so, like, that was like a dream, I think, for about 15 minutes in a in like a little meeting conference thing between coaches.
Yeah, I saw that. I think. I mean, that would have been so fun. The fans would have loved it. Everybody would have loved it. But really, it wasn't plausible. I mean, you have three days, I think it would have been, to prepare for a whole nother team. And one of the main things that made it so it didn't happen was simply UW and Arizona already are scheduled to play each other on, I think, week 3, I believe. And so then what are you going to do then? Are you going to try and schedule? I mean, you just have an empty week then. You're not going to play 2 times in 3 weeks. So yeah, it was the kind of a combination of the short time, no preparation for that opponent, and just having them on the schedule already.
Yeah. One exciting thing, though, to talk about game cancellations in terms of good news, but some bad news first, I guess, to get to the good news. The Berkeley area, their government, their governor, their health department, whatever it is, they have the ruling for 2 weeks of quarantine after a positive case. So with one of them at least having that positive case and them waiting on the contact tracing tests that they did for who came into contact with the unnamed player, 2 weeks if they test positive means that the ASU game for Berkeley might also get canceled. Depending on Utah's policy, their next game against UCLA might also have to be canceled. So with all of this information ahead of time and the ability to see this coming, one thing that has been talked about that has a slightly higher chance than what I mentioned for like this past weekend impromptu game is that we do have a slightly higher chance of seeing a UCLA versus an Arizona. That one is on the table. So like they are the league, the administrators, coaches, and staff from school to school, they're all working together to make sure things can kind of happen, even though we might have game cancellations here and there. I'm just hoping that we get this week's game for us. Like, I don't care what happens with the rest of the league at this point. I just want us to get our game this week and the weeks following. That's just kind of the news about what's going to happen around game cancellations, what might happen afterwards. What do you think about a UCLA Arizona game happening next week? How plausible do you think that is?
Like talking about this Saturday would be
this
then,
Saturday. Yeah, this Saturday. It would be this Saturday.
Yeah, I don't think it's plausible. Again, kind of the same for the UW Arizona game because they don't find out until 2 days before they're scheduled to travel. And bringing in kind of Cal and their 14-day quarantine period, it's really tough on this school. I mean, people have actually asked, like the coach Justin Wilcox, I believe, are you guys thinking about moving locations just to avoid the strict rules at Berkeley? I mean, it's tough how it is, 14-day quarantine just for being in like the area on close contact with another guy. I mean, just one guy at Cal tested positive. He was asymptomatic. And everyone else who was close contact has not had a positive test. They've been tested each day, I believe, and they haven't had one positive test, but they still aren't cleared. So it's going to be tough for Cal to play this week. I don't know if they're going to, I don't know when they're going to decide. But bringing it back to like how shaky it was and the possibility of more games being canceled, I think for sure we're going to have more games in the Pac-12 canceled. Just look at, I mean, week 1, 2 games were already canceled, especially in certain states, the different rulings, certain counties, the more strict areas. The one bit of positive news, though, that I saw, Jimmy Lake commented on the Cal situation, and he actually said that if it had happened at UW, the game wouldn't have been canceled. So at least as far as we're aware, the UW contact tracing rules for here aren't as strict as they are in Berkeley. So that's a good thing, I think. Less likely UW's at fault for one of these cancellations. Don't want to jinx anything. And then bringing it back to, I just lost my train of thought, but I'm concerned each week, I guess, with a cancellation game, just from the situation of it. I mean, it's tough to stop the spread. It's tough for the contact tracing. Which, bringing it back to contact tracing, actually, I mean, the point of the Quidel partnership, this everyday testing for the Pac-12, was to prevent this contact tracing from being so great like it was at Cal, I guess. And I guess week one, we already saw that fail. I mean, so what's the point with this daily testing? You're testing every day. Even if you test every day, you get someone come back positive. Next thing you know, you've got a whole offensive line group or whole offensive or defensive line group out because they were near the guy for, I think Cal was like, if you're near him for 15 minutes or something, you get close contact. So I'm confused on the Quidel testing and how it's actually helping.
So the Quidel testing, from, if my memory serves me correctly, is absolutely there. It's not there as a stopgap measure.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's not the right word. Sorry, it's not there as like an end all measure. It's not there as the thing to replace all other items there. It's supposed to be there to work in tandem with contact tracing. It's there to work in tandem with the non-daily tests, like the full scale tests, to do like the super or relatively super accurate readings. That's all supposed to work together in tandem. Now, the rules down in Berkeley are a lot stricter, even though they are partnering with Quidel still, as the entire league is. However, I do know that they immediately pulled that athlete out. They then went through their contact tracing protocol, which was to view footage from the past 5 days, see everyone he's come into contact, how much time it happened. And they did end up having to take out their entire position group, which I think you mentioned earlier. We still don't know what position group that is. But that's the goal, is to have that happen. The length of time necessary, though, I mean, that's up for debate. I'm personally not an expert, so I can't really comment on that. But the main goal of contact tracing in these daily tests is to limit the secondary spreads, because that's where the numbers start to get really big. I mean, you have one person giving it to 3 or 4, maybe, sure, that's 4 new people who get it. Contact tracing, and its biggest, I think, positive that comes out of this, especially in the Berkeley situation, is that because they pulled that entire position group, which is that 3 to 4 infection rate, now they have no worry about those 3 to 4, or that entire position group, getting those secondary tracings. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from this, is that we had a system. Yes, it may have been flawed. I think the biggest point, though, is to say we had a system in place, a set of rules, a set of guidelines. We followed them. We cut back. For as much as we know right now, we cut back on as many secondary exposures and infections as possible. That's the system being put in place. That's the system working. I'm happy to see it, even though it may be a little janky. The time limits may be a little off. That's the main point, I think, here from me. I think that's one of the greater things to focus on. And I think that's kind of how Quidel's playing into this. I mean, obviously, we never want to see anyone get infected. We never want to see these things happening. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. Do you have anything else to say on it?
No, I think you covered it good. I think that just the Quidel contact tracing is supposed to get those players spotted and out of there quickly. It's just about which county or what your local rules are as far as who gets selected for that contact tracing and how long they're actually out for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things that definitely played a factor in this as well, and why they went so far back as 5 days, was because the player was asymptomatic. So they don't have any, I guess, clear guidelines on how long of a timeline they need to be looking for. So that situation in itself sucks, really specific, really intricate. But yeah, I wish that player, all the other players who are infected or have come into contact with those guys, I wish them all the best. Yeah, and that right there just about finishes up all the time that we have for today. Once again, I'm Joseph Claypoole, and this is Nathan Mathisen. You can follow us on our different social medias, which are on screen right now. Sorry. Now, we're just a small part of the Dashboards family, so if you'd like to meet the rest of the crew, please go ahead and check out our website, dashboards.tv, as well as our partners website, sportspac12.com. Over there is where you can also read further into segments from our weekly shows, all of which for our show are written by Nathan. If you'd like to revisit the best moments of today's episode or others, head over to our website where you can find clips, quips, tips, rips, terrible jokes, and as many of the full episodes as you can stand, all in one place, all for free, dashboards.tv. We'll see you next week, but for now, this is Husky Dash signing off.